Hello and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program here on the Community Listening Network. My name is Keith David Henry. For the last few weeks we have been discussing the Divine Feminine, and we've pretty much wrapped that up. And if I were to summarize the group of the last several programs that we did on the Divine Feminine, I would characterize those groups of programs as a means to get us to start thinking a bit differently about God and about who we are in relationship to God and what God means to us. In a lot of my programs and in my books, I know that very often I seem critical of religion. And, I don't apologize for anything I've said about it, but I would like to repeat just a little context for people so they kind of have an idea of where I'm coming from. In thinking about religion, I think about how many people's lives, have been altered through religion. You see these programs about, for instance, people that have been in jail and have been, the ultimate scoundrel, and while they were in jail, they adapted Islam and became very productive citizens and reached out to help their people. And instead of murdering and stealing and killing, they began a program of trying to educate their people about who they were and what their personal power is. And of course, people such as Malcolm X, who took that kind of route, as soon as he discovered that the religion he embraced was really not telling him the truth, and he reached out to people and started relaying to them what he felt was the truth based on his observations, well, he was killed. And you can go on and on and on with that. And it's the same story with Christianity, where people had been, the quintessential example of sociopathic behavior. They met Jesus and got saved and turned their lives around and embraced Jesus Christ and the message of the gospel, and began to preach that this person that then became a very positive influence. But there's one thing I've noticed about religion, and that is that the longer you stay involved with a specific religion and the more you embrace it to the exclusion of other religions, the more restrictive it becomes. And I'm not going to go into detail about that, and I'm certainly not going to condemn anyone's choice of religion, because that's not what this program is all about. But one of the things that's going to be very important in this Aquarian age is that we realize, as Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. It's not in a building, it's within you. You are the epitome of the kingdom of God. And whenever you get into a discussion about God, the term God is such a difficult discussion, because there's so many different ideas about who God is. It's one of those terms that just becomes very divisive, because one of the mainstays of religion, not all religions obviously, but many of them, especially monotheistic religions, and I would say almost exclusively monotheistic religions, you don't see this element too much in polytheistic religions, but in monotheistic religions, is that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. My God is a real God and your God is a fake God, or you may call your God something else, but it's really my God and you're deceived. And this type of thinking is the type of thinking that was involved with things like the Crusades, where hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people were murdered and tortured because they refused to accept one religion's idea of who God was. And that is not by any means a dynamic that is exclusive to Christianity. Holy wars have dominated the human landscape for as long as there was written histories for as far as I can tell. And that the differences that were accentuated by religious thought have been responsible for many problems in society. Now, I would say one of the primary aspects of the New Age movement, which, I have my issues with the New Age movement as well. One of my primary issues is the idea that we should all join together under one umbrella, and that there should be brotherhood, and the ideals unity and peace. But we have to be careful that we steer clear of manufacturing unity, because we're already one. Our unity is perfect, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So when we start talking about unity and oneness and togetherness, we have to start questioning, what is the purpose of this unity? What is the purpose of this oneness? To bring everybody together in one vein of thought. Well, that is the antithesis of the Aquarian energy that is really engulfing the solar system at this time, and is the hallmark of the, if you want to call it, the New Age or the Aquarian Age. And there are various scriptures where Jesus is quoted as saying, "Behold, I will be with you until the end of the world." And there's this new movie coming out, 2012 it's called, and it really relates to the Mayan prophecy of the end of the world. And you have various Native American prophecies about the end of the world happening at the same period of time, 2012. And if you get into the astrological esoteric, you'll see that there are certain cosmic events, certain astronomic and astrological events that are occurring that the Mayan calendar was mapping, that also correlate with many of these prophecies. And whenever you think about end time prophecy, you can't help but think about the book of Revelation that talks about all of these terrible things happening. And I'm convinced that many of these writings have really not been explained to us or given to us in the manner that they were really intended. For instance, in those places where Jesus talks about, "I'll be with you until the end of the world," in various translations, the actual translation is, "I will be with you until the end of the age." And what is an age? And this is debatable. I don't claim to be an expert on this subject, but it's no accident that at this time when these prophecies are coming together, that from a astrological standpoint, we are passing from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age, the age of Aquarius, the age of individual autonomy, individual empowerment. And to rally around the idea of making everybody one and bringing everybody together under one blanket or one umbrella, well, this is the agenda of the New World Order. To have everyone saying the same thing and everyone doing the same thing. This is not a productive sentiment. It is, in my opinion, a clandestine attempt to undermine the individual autonomy and authority of the individual person, to keep us from looking internally and from grasping source and our particular manifestation of source through the vehicle called me or I, that, you know, the initiative to keep people from being individuals is really a trap. So the Aquarian age really means that, among other things, we need to delve into our internal resources, our own individual internal connectedness with Source, and to rest in that and to trust that. Now, you know, as I've said in other programs, that can be a very, very scary proposition, because we're so used to other people telling us what to do and other people setting the groundwork for us, that it can indeed be scary to think that, wow, you mean I don't have, you know, a religion to tell me how to treat my neighbor or what to do? You know, I don't have, you know, a leader you know, instructing me in, you know, where I should go and what I should say and how I should say it. That is scary, because as a species we're not used to trusting our internal intuition. And by and large, throughout history, people who have trusted that and people who have trusted what has been revealed to them in their heart have been vilified and, you know, many times treated violently because of the way that they look at things and their own individual imaginative contribution to the whole. I really don't think that I have any words that can adequately express the value and the importance of imagination. Imagination is really the most creative force that we as humans have access to, because imagination reaches into that area of playful acceptance and embracing of God, the one of which we are constituents, if you will, individual constituents, reaching into that area of autonomy and pulling out gems of creativity that enhance everyone. So, you know, the common objection you hear to this type of direction is that, you know, if everyone does what they feel is right and what, you know, and what they feel is good, that you'll have anarchy and just total chaos. Well, there is some point that could be made to that. If you take a bunch of people and you cut them off from any, you know, any coherent sense of structure and then just throw them in the ring together, well, yes, you are going to have that. But if you teach people from a very early age that they are autonomous and that they are beautiful on their own and that they don't need any external direction, that you create a very beautiful thing. You know, I recall when I was, you know, very heavily involved in Christianity, that I had been, you know, doing my normal studying and everything, and I was reading about the Holy Ghost and what Jesus had said about the Holy Ghost. And he said, you know, when I go away, I'm going to send you a teacher. I'm going to send you the Holy Ghost, and he will teach you everything that you should know and that you should do. And then I would read verses where it said, well, you know, God gave some prophets and teachers, etc., offices in the church to teach you. And, you know, I had trouble sometimes reconciling that, not from the standpoint of the scriptures, but from the standpoint of what I saw going on. And that was that you had thousands or millions of preachers, all pretty much saying, you know, this is what the Bible says. And, you know, what is the role of the Holy Ghost, and what does the Holy Ghost teach you if I got this guy, you know, behind the podium telling me what God is saying to me? And, you know, that was difficult for me to reconcile at one point, and I still have, I guess, questions about that. But I'm not against teaching per se, but for the most part, education is a process of someone taking something that they were taught and teaching you that same thing. And while there's nothing wrong with that, while you're educating a person, you need to also be helping them to understand how to apply their intuition and their imagination to that teaching to glean what they individually feel inside and what they individually connect with from the standpoint of their personal autonomy and their personal sovereignty, and get them to lean to that instead of the teaching or the education. I had mentioned in a prior program that I had received I guess a communication with the Archangel Uriel. And, somebody said, well, how do you know it was Uriel? And my feeling is, well, I really don't care whether it was or not, because the value of information is not its source, but its viability. And I know one of the things that was very impressive to me that I believe came from Uriel was he said, if any man or angel or God himself tells you anything and what you're being told contradicts your own intuition, then ignore that man or that angel or God. And I thought that was very profound, because what Uriel was saying in a few words was that your intuition is directly plugged into God. And what good or use or value is it for everyone to be clumped into one group and doing the same thing everyone else does and saying the same thing everyone else says? This is not healthy, this is not productive, and it's certainly not valuable to the whole to just become lemmings and follow along and do everything, do what everyone else is doing. Each one of us, every one of the 7 billion people on this planet, has a unique perspective, a unique look. You could say that each one of us is a unique lens that Source has thrown out there to contribute to the collective in their own individual way. So that the idea of everyone saying and doing the same thing is really, kind of a perversion of what should be happening, which is everyone becoming their own imaginative portal to what we call reality, and thereby causing, great growth and expansion of not only, the Earth, but the entire universe. And this is what I believe is the goal of growth, which is to, to experience and move in directions that other people have not moved. In certain circles of, profession or religion or anything else, a person is typically esteemed as, having reached a pinnacle of excellence when they can repeat with, a high level of accuracy what someone has said to them. In fact, you go to school and you read your textbook and you go to class and you listen to the lecture and you do your homework, and then you take the exam, and what's on the exam? Well, what's on the exam is what you heard during lecture, what you read in the book, and what you did with your homework. And if you spit that stuff out exactly the way it's in the book or in the lecture and the homework, you get an A or an A+, or you can even get extra credit. And I found that as a preacher during those days, the more closely you repeated what you were taught, typically, the more you were accepted by the community. And, that's the way community works. I have no issue with that. But community is not the optimal venue for growth. Individuality is the optimal venue for growth. And as I said before, one of the things that Einstein said was imagination is more important than knowledge. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. My name is Keith David Henry, and we're on the Community Listening Network. And one of the reasons I like to talk about Einstein a lot is because here's a guy that really delved into his imagination. And I like to contrast the difference between what Einstein did and, for instance, what Isaac Newton did, because it's extremely important to see the distinction. Both Einstein and Isaac Newton did something that was unprecedented. Isaac Newton said, hey, there's a force called gravity, and this is how it works. Now, let me qualify what I mean by that. Essentially, Isaac Newton observed the heavenly bodies with relationship to the earth and relationship to other heavenly bodies, and he noticed that, hey, when this body interacts with that heavenly body in a certain way, it always does this and it does that, and it has this kind of influence, and it always works the same way, so much so that he was able to formulate mathematics that explained it. And Isaac Newton never claimed to understand the inner workings of gravity. He more or less just said, hey, my observation is that it always behaves this way, and is so precise that we can formulate and apply mathematical formulas to it. Well, Einstein did something very, very different. Einstein said, hey, these are the inner workings of gravity. This is how it really works. And then he came up with mathematical formulas that supported his belief, but he had no empirical proof. He just used his imagination and what I believe was his internal connectedness to Source, to God, whatever you want to call it. And he said, this is the truth about it. And after about 10 years, he was able to prove it. So they kind of took different approaches. Whereas, Isaac Newton said, well, look at this, and here's the math that explains it. Einstein said, well, this is the explanation, here's the mathematics behind the explanation, and now I'll prove it to you, and I'll show you that this is how it works. And, contrary to popular opinion, Einstein is essentially the father of quantum mechanics, although he spent a great deal of his time opposing many of the popular elements of quantum mechanics. But the point was, he was very imaginative in what he did. Now, here's a way you can pretty much tell when you're on the right track when you find a large percentage of the people around you seem to be in opposition to what you do and what you say. Typically, you're on the right track, and we could go to extremes with this, but what I'm talking about is that imaginative spark within that is really the hallmark of creativity. When you start stepping out into an area of uniqueness, well, obviously you're not going to have a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon necessarily, until it's proven, until it appears viable. And then, then you get the front runners that jump on the bandwagon. But for the most part, I can't underestimate, and you really need to start thinking about your own personal creativity and connectedness to Source. That's really what we need to develop at this point in human history. Now, I need to say very quickly that it's going to be very difficult to develop that personal autonomy and that personal creativity without examining your emotional predispositions. As I've said, and as many people have said that are pretty much on the cutting edge of things, is that, you know, as a race and as a species, emotionally, we are pretty much we're damaged. We haven't been taught to develop our emotions. We haven't been taught to deal with our subconscious. We're so used to burying and suppressing our emotions and our feelings, and you know, we've been taught to do it, you know, from a very early age, and from society's standpoint, you know, you have to be happy, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. That we actually think that there's something wrong with exploring those emotions, especially the ones that we consider negative. What we don't understand is that by suppressing those emotions and by rationalizing those emotions rather than by owning them, that we just further suppress them. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for instance, and you know, this is not just true with religion, but in many other societies. One of the things, you're never supposed to be sad. You're never supposed to be down. You're not supposed to be angry. You're not supposed to be, you know, have any of these you know, I guess negative emotions. Well, a very wise person who, you know, I don't know who said it, but it's pretty well known, and that is that the way out is through, not around or over. So part of the process of emotional health, of subconscious health, is to allow those feelings. Give yourself the permission to feel the way that you feel without judging those feelings, without condemning those feelings. They're your feelings. Own them. Well, you know, a lot of people say, well, I feel bad about feeling a certain way, and you know, I'm not supposed to feel this way. But it's not a matter of supposed to. The fact is, you feel that way. So if you feel sad, allow yourself to feel that sadness. If you feel angry, allow yourself to feel that anger. If you feel indignant, allow yourself to feel that. You may want to play with it mentally and ask yourself, well, why do I feel that? And, you know, that can be productive, but that's not nearly as important as acknowledging those things and literally letting them work through your body. Because a lot of the mental and physical dis-eases that we have are based on the suppression of these emotions. Not only do they sink into the collective subconscious and affect the entire human race, but they affect the physical body. They have adverse effects on the physical body, and we start wondering, well, why do we have these aches? Why do we have these pains? Why do we have all of these emotional, mental problems? And there are many explanations for this, but the principal one is the fact that we are suppressing things that are better allowed expression in our experience and in our emotions. This is not an easy thing to do. I'll say that straight up. It's not easy at all, because you know, many of the negative feelings and emotions that we have, you know, they can be irrational. And then some of the emotions and feelings that we have are based on, for instance, how we feel we've been treated by people. You know, you can get angry at people. Well, they did this and they shouldn't have done it, and now you're angry, but you're thinking, well, you know, I'm an enlightened human being. full of power and, forging ahead into the new age, and therefore I should not allow myself to experience these feelings. Well, you're doing the opposite. You're like the person that says, well, it's not there when it is, and you're just further suppressing it, and what you're doing is making it more powerful. So you think you're being virtuous by suppressing these feelings, when what you're doing is you're harming yourself. So, in my books I talk a lot about the emotions and dealing with the emotions, and your body, your physical body, your astral body, your emotional body, and the other subtle bodies have a natural mechanism for dealing with these emotions and these events in your life. And suppressing them not only does it not get rid of those feelings, but they start to manifest in your circumstance. They start to show up as events. They start to show up as, people, places, and things in your life, and you begin to deal with them as if they are external, when actually what you're seeing is your internal self being projected on your screen of perspective and consciousness. So you might as well deal with them. You might as well claim them as your own and take them on and acknowledge them and give them the right to exist. Don't resist them. Allow them to assimilate through your person. I recently had a guest on my program. In fact, the last 3 programs I've been talking to Jill Mattson, who is just a wonderful guest on the program, but she's also very astute at the esoteric application of music, sound, and vibration. And, I recall after speaking with her, I had some of her music on, and, I experienced what I considered a very profound healing from kind of an annoying fear that had been plaguing me for years and years. And when I say an annoying fear, it's one of those things that popped up at a certain period of time, and while I didn't suppress it, I allowed myself to be mentally aware of it, and I allowed it to exist. And I didn't fight it. I just told myself, well, it's there, and I never really, applied any initiative in dealing with it. Well, one evening after, having spoken with her, I think it was during the time we were taping the last 3 programs, I was listening to some of her music, and I noted that on one of her CDs there was a song that, literally targeted that fear that I had, just kind of allowed to hang around. And I have to say that there was probably a certain level of suppression or denial, so to speak, hardly noticeable though, because I told myself, well, I'm not going to deny this fear, and I'm not going to, suppress it. This fear is here, and I'll just hang on to it for a little while, for lack of a better way of expressing it. But the interesting thing about the healing element of Jill's music, particularly with regard to that fear, is that when it targeted that fear, I felt the fear very profoundly, as I had at other times. But rather than feeling that fear as if I was in a no man's land dealing with this encroaching enemy into my life, the healing music sort of reached into my being and resonated with the fear and then gutted it out. And in a discussion I later had with Jill, she made a very profound yet simple statement, which, the most profound things usually are very simple, is that to be healed from emotional distress or stress, you have to feel it. The process of the purging of that emotional dis-ease brings with it the feeling of that emotional dis-ease. Again, the way out is through. So it can be, a very, I guess, an ominous process to think that, well, what do you mean? So now I have to take all of these emotions and all these feelings that I've suppressed all these years and just let myself feel them and go through that? Well, not for the sake of feeling the emotions, but to be healed from them, you have to feel them. But among other things, you have to give yourself permission to feel them. And, one of the things that I so appreciate about what Jill Madsen is doing is the effortless power that music, sound, and vibration has in bringing about profound physical and emotional healing. If you're at all concerned, or if you at all see the importance of this emotional healing, then I highly recommend that you visit her site. The website is jillswingsoflight.com. And she has on that site some free healing music that you can download, and I highly encourage you to download it and also to pick up some of her CDs. But it's almost cheating. And what I mean by that is there's very little work involved except listening and releasing. And somebody said, well, that hardly seems fair. I mean, you've had all of these, for thousands of years, these gurus and spiritual teachers that were talking about all these processes and things that you have to go through to become spiritual, which I believe is a misnomer, because you can't become something you already are. You can only acknowledge it and become aware of it. And it's sort of like, the way that I use my crystals and gemstones is like cheating, because, I mean, the transformative power of these types of things is so powerful and, so appropriate for counteracting things that are here on Earth to disrupt that process of, individual growth, individual autonomy, individual imagination. These earthly tools that the dark oligarchy or the New World Order, or all these people that they're using to undermine us, are really weak by comparison to these tools that we've been given. So, once again, as I had said in a previous program, at this time, we've been given knowledge and resources to help us grow and excel in the area of self-development. And don't be afraid to investigate ideals and thoughts and imaginative impulses that seem different from what you've been taught and what other people are saying. Don't be afraid to step out there and let your heart follow those things. Let your heart and your mind be aware of your own uniqueness and your own beauty and your own power, and embrace that. Embrace that. An easy exercise that you can do, if you want to call it a meditation or whatever, think of, the figure that you most admire, the spiritual figure that you feel that you most admire and that you feel has had, profound impact upon the human race in terms of spiritual development or the development of human potential. And when you think about your esteem for them, realize that you are them, in the sense that that same power resides in you. And I'm not talking about any, big, great, paradigm shift of, oh, well, I can be like that person, because you don't want to be like that person. What you want to do is develop that individual spark that made that person powerful in your own thinking, or important or profound, or their contributions profound to the human race. That same spark resides in you, but it will manifest differently and uniquely. So, you start thinking about those individual people that you feel had, a profound effect on the human race. And you can talk, spiritually or esoterically. You can talk about musicians. You can talk about writers. You can talk about artists or scientists. It's all the same stuff. And start realizing that the only difference between you and them is that they followed their individual impulse, which, don't think that as a baby, they popped out saying, okay, here's my thesis. This is something that many times was developed over a long period of time, much of which was spent questioning the status quo and comparing it to these individual impulses they had, and saying to themselves, well, I was taught this, yet I have that feeling. And what I'm saying to you is that with this Aquarian energy, it's much easier now to say, well, hey, I want to start following my own individual reality, my own individual creativity, and my internal connectedness to Source. It's easier to do that, especially with all these tools that we've been given. And I spoke on a previous program about, different things like crystals and tarot and whatnot that can be used to help develop our own intuition, and these are all beautiful tools. But, again, music is one of the easiest ways to do it. And the reason I say it's so easy is because the knowledge of the healing power of music has pretty much been suppressed. It's been kept from us, and it's been that healing power has really been controlled by the government and religious powers that be for a very, very long time. And we're in a rather unique place in history where we have the freedom to embrace those things and step into those things on an individual basis without feeling restricted by our surroundings. So it's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, silly. What floats your boat? What turns you on? What brings you bliss? Well, go in that direction. Follow that direction, and I really don't know too many people who have an aversion to music. It's sort of like a no-brainer. Like, for instance, for me, as I said, I'm very comfortable with crystals, using crystals and gemstones as a self-therapeutic tool, and also as a tool for others. And if you feel some kind of aversion to that sort of thing, well, music is a very, very, very powerful tool that is, an easy way to approach that internal development and growth and healing. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness program, and you're on the Community Listening Network, www.clnradio.com, and I'm your host, Keith David Henry. Now, it would be difficult to discuss the concept of emotional healing or emotional or subconscious development without discussing a concept called the dark night of the soul. And, it's called that because it represents a process of a person, delving into, and many times kicking and screaming, and certainly seemingly not voluntarily, but delving into an area of self-examination when it comes to the emotions and suppressed emotions, emotions that have been buried deep into the collective subconscious, emotions that have been buried deeply within the physical body, emotions that many times have been suppressed over, multiple lifetimes. One could say perhaps elements of karma that have not been dealt with or have not been faced, and many times people have not necessarily discounted those emotions. A lot of times we just don't know how to deal with them. And one of the problems with a lot of times organized religion, and again, not every religion, because primarily I speak about these things for the sake of people that had been trapped in religion and are feeling certain urges and certain desires to move away from it, or at least specific religions, into an area of more freedom. So I'm talking to them. I'm not talking to people that are involved with religion and they're satisfied with the religion and they love the religion and they feel perfectly comfortable. I'm not saying that either one of those two is more valid than the other, but I'm speaking in an arena that I felt led to speak in. So we've got these concepts and ideals that we shouldn't be reaching to certain things, and many times because of our desire to grow, we find ourselves in this dark night of the soul, which is probably analogous in many ways to a type of metaphorical death, where we delve into an area where all of a sudden we find ourselves surrounded by these emotional challenges. Let me assure those of you that are experiencing these type of sensations that you're experiencing them because you will be called upon to help others to travel through that underworld that you are currently experiencing. And the tools that you will garner from experiencing that dark night of the soul will become a light for others to help them get through it, because your contribution to the collective and your relief of the pressure, if you will, on the collective subconscious is much greater than you can imagine. I believe that it's probably one of the most valuable tools we have for cleansing is crying. It's crying, and this is one of the reasons why I feel women tend to be much more emotionally healthy and therefore experience much greater physical longevity, is their ability to release those emotions through crying. I recall watching a movie, I believe it was called City of Angels, and it was with, I can't remember his name right now, it'll come to me, but it was a movie about Nicolas Cage. That's it. It was Nicolas Cage, and I think it was Meg Ryan, I'm pretty sure, but I don't recall. And there was a scene, Nicolas Cage was an angel, and he had fallen in love with Meg Ryan, and he was in contact with her, and they were having a conversation, and Nicolas Cage asked Meg Ryan's character, why do people cry? And she started talking about the physical explanation of why people cry. And he said, well, maybe people cry because the body becomes overwhelmed with emotions, and that the body weeps to release them. One of the most destructive things that has ever been taught from a standpoint of society is the idea that people should not cry. Because the ability to cry, the ability to release that emotion through crying, is one of the greatest gifts that we've been given. And when, maybe you see somebody crying, you say, oh, what's wrong? What can I do? How can I help you? Well, they're helping themselves by crying. And if there's nothing wrong with commiserating, there's nothing wrong with comforting, but by all means, Don't stop them from crying. I think lately, a lot of women have started to experience the same physical ailments and stress as men have, as women have become more and more involved in the corporate grind and have been, allowed to participate more in society than they had traditionally been allowed to be. I don't know that it's the best trade-off, but that it seems like more and more women are becoming more and more vulnerable to the stress of everyday life, and kind of catching up with men in terms of the types of ailments that are plaguing them. I remember hearing a statistic that said something like 80% of people that are in hospitals are there because of stress. Well, you're not going to do anything with stress. Stress is the stuff that makes the world work, the tension between negative and positive. There's nothing wrong with stress. It's how we deal with stress that is the issue. When we suppress the stress, when we are taught to take that stress or take the feelings behind that stress and stick it in a compartment and pack it away somewhere because it has no place in the workplace, it has no place in our emotional lives, it has no place in our spiritual development, it's a bad thing that doesn't help anyone. Well, the truth is it does help, because acknowledging what we consider to be negative emotions, acknowledging them is a very important first step to healing them. Acknowledging them and feeling them and allowing them to filter through our bodies and allowing the natural process of feeling those emotions and letting them go through our bodies and letting them go through our emotions and letting ourselves steep in them, if you will, is very, very valuable. Now, somebody said, well, if you get too depressed, you might jump off a building or something. And it's always a good idea to, rather than get to that point, it's always a good idea to consult someone that may be able to help you deal with those emotions, but by no means should you suppress them. There are a lot of people that are on drugs to help them, circumvent these emotions, and I find that analogous to people that take cold medicine for the common cold. Now let me just develop that analogy a bit. People said, well, there's no cure for the common cold. Well, I maintain that there's no cure for the common cold because the common cold is the cure. The common cold is a means of your physical body cleansing physical toxins that have been built up in the body. So, what do we do with them? Well, we take cold medicine. We take cold medicine and we don't allow our body to cleanse those things. And so, rather than being cleansed, the cold medicine suppresses the symptoms, and in a few days or a week or whatever, the symptoms go away, or so we think. But what we've actually done is pushed that cleansing, pushed the toxins that our body would have cleansed if we allowed that cold to take its natural course. We took those toxins and stored them in our physical bodies. And we do this for years and years and years and years and years. And then eventually it starts seeping out into the body and causing all sorts of diseases in our old age. And people think, well, it's natural to be sick in your old age, and I beg to differ. But by suppressing the cleansing process, which is generally regarded as a good thing, when it's not at all, by suppressing that cleansing process, all we do is put it off to where once we do experience it, it's going to be much more difficult to deal with. Well, this is what we do with our emotions, and I'm not against medication per se. I'm against the whole genre of pharmaceuticals that is designed as quote-unquote treatment, because for the most part Western medicine has nothing to do with healing. It has to do with treatment, and it's profit driven, it's pharmaceutical driven. So we take these medications, so they're called, to suppress these emotional diseases rather than deal with them. And it's no easy task, because of the great power, the great energy that's built up in our emotions. They're like huge springs that we have depressed and depressed and depressed and depressed our whole lives, and now that spring is so tight that if we let it go, well, sure, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. Psychosis is possibly one of those types of things. So, we go to a doctor and he prescribes more medicine to suppress those things. But in the end, it does more harm than good. So what am I suggesting? That we just jump headlong into an emotional no man's land? Well, that may not be a good idea, certainly not for most people. And once again, I'm reiterating this because I feel so profoundly such a profound sense that music is a very, very important key to helping us overcome. Well, overcome is a bad word. To helping us through the processing of a lot of these suppressed emotions. And just crying. Maybe you sit in your house for an hour and just feel the feelings that you've been suppressing, and just let yourself cry, let yourself, moan, let yourself wail if you want. Let it out. Let those feelings be processed. The dark night of the soul is very seldom a pleasant experience. But the fruit of going through the dark night of the soul is something whose rewards are incalculable, absolutely incalculable. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio broadcast. My name is Keith David Henry, and you're on the you're on the Community Listening Network, www.clnradio.com. I encourage you to visit my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net. Also, if you want more information about the emotional healing that I've spoken about, I deal with it in all three books, but I deal with it most particularly in my most recent book, which is Terra, T-E-R-R-A, Terra, Return of the Divine Feminine. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next week.